The Grand Harrington Hotel's marble lobby went absolutely still the moment the security manager's voice cut across the polished atrium like a blade through silk. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from the front desk. Right now." 47 people in that lobby heard those words. Several of them turned to look. A handful reached almost reflexively for their phones, because the woman being addressed, a compact, immaculately dressed black woman in a tailored navy blazer, standing quietly at the check-in counter with a single leather carry-on at her feet, had done absolutely nothing wrong. She had simply attempted to check in to the hotel room she'd reserved 6 weeks in advance. Security manager Dale Pruitt had been working the floor of the Grand Harrington for 9 years. He was the kind of man who had mistaken the weight of a uniform for the weight of authority for so long that the two had become indistinguishable in his mind. He was broad, florid-faced, with the perpetual squint of someone who had spent a decade scanning lobbies for threats he had personally decided to believe in, and the moment he spotted Colonel Anita Beauchamp standing alone at the front desk, he had made a decision based on nothing more than what he saw and what he assumed. He saw a black woman, mid-40s, traveling alone, with luggage that didn't come with a logo he recognized. He assumed she didn't belong. What Dale Pruitt did not see, could not be bothered to see, was the posture. The absolute, unshakable stillness of a woman who had spent 23 years making decisions under enemy fire. The quiet, coiled economy of movement that comes only from surviving things that would break most people. He did not see the small, precise way her eyes tracked him the moment he began his approach across the lobby floor. The way a hawk watches something moving in the grass below. Not with fear, but with absolute calculating patience. Colonel Anita Beauchamp, United States Army, had commanded a combat aviation brigade in Afghanistan. She had flown Black Hawk helicopters through mountain passes, where the margin between life and a rotor clipping a cliff face was measured in inches. She had buried soldiers she loved. She had written letters to their mothers. She had testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee on 3 separate occasions. She had been awarded the Legion of Merit and the Distinguished Flying Cross. Tonight she was in Charlotte, North Carolina, for a 2-day Veterans Leadership Symposium at which she was the keynote speaker. She had checked into this particular hotel, the Grand Harrington, the event's official venue, because the symposium organizers had specifically arranged a block of rooms for presenting officers. None of that mattered to Dale Pruitt. He planted himself between Anita and the front desk clerk, a young woman named Becca whose expression had gone from polite professionalism to visible discomfort in approximately 4 seconds. "There's been a concern flagged about this reservation," Pruitt said, not looking at Becca, looking at Anita with that particular brand of authority that isn't really authority at all. "It's just aggression wearing a lanyard. I'm going to need to verify your identity before we can proceed." Anita set her room key confirmation printout on the counter. She had already provided her government ID to Becca. The reservation was confirmed. The room was paid for. There was nothing to verify. "My identification has already been provided," Anita said. Her voice was even. Not warm, not cold. The temperature of someone who has learned that composure is its own form of power. "My reservation is confirmed under my name. Is there a specific concern you'd like to articulate?" Pruitt's jaw tightened. He was not accustomed to being answered with precision. He was accustomed to people flinching. "We've had some issues with fraudulent bookings," he said, and the vagueness of it, the deliberate, practiced vagueness, was almost impressive in its ugliness. "Corporate cards. We need to run additional verification on the account." "The room is booked on a government travel voucher," Anita replied, "issued by the Department of the Army. If there's an issue with the voucher, I'd suggest you contact the travel office directly. The number is on the document." Pruitt leaned slightly forward, lowering his voice in that way people do when they want to convey a threat while maintaining deniability. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one more time to step away from the desk while we sort this out. There's a seating area near the elevator bank. You can wait there." The lobby had gone very quiet. Not library quiet. The specific quality of silence that descends on a room when the people in it realize they are watching something wrong happen in real time and haven't yet decided what to do about it. Anita did not move. She placed both hands flat on the counter, clearly, deliberately, visibly calm, and looked at Dale Pruitt with the expression of a woman calculating something. "I am not going to the seating area," she said quietly. "I'm going to stand here while this reservation is processed, as is my right as a confirmed guest of this hotel." If you believe there is a legitimate reason to deny me service, I would like that reason stated clearly, recorded by your front desk staff, and provided to me in writing." Pruitt's face went a particular shade of red that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with the specific humiliation of being outmaneuvered in his own lobby. "You're being difficult," he said. "I'm being precise," Anita replied. "Those are different things." She had dealt with men like Pruitt her entire career. Not always in hotel lobbies. Sometimes in briefing rooms. Sometimes on tarmacs. Sometimes in Pentagon hallways where the assumption that she was the assistant, the aide, the plus one, was delivered with such casual confidence that the men making it never even registered the error. She had learned over 23 years that rage was expensive and composure was armor. She deployed it now with the same deliberateness she would deploy any tactical asset. Not because she wasn't angry. She was. She deployed it because it worked. Pruitt reached for the radio on his hip. "I'm calling my supervisor," he announced with the air of a man playing what he believed to be his trump card. "Please do," Anita said. His supervisor was a woman named Gloria Trent, the hotel's director of security, who was in the middle of reviewing CCTV footage in the back office when Pruitt's call came through. Gloria had been in hotel security for 18 years. She was good at her job precisely because she had trained herself to see what was actually happening, rather than what she expected to be happening. She arrived in the lobby in under 2 minutes, took one look at the situation. Pruitt, red-faced and rigid, standing between a quietly immovable black woman and the front desk, and felt a specific sinking sensation in her stomach. "What's the situation, Dale?" she asked, keeping her voice professional. "Guest is refusing to comply with our verification request," Pruitt said. Gloria looked at Anita. Anita looked back at her with an expression that communicated with extraordinary efficiency everything that had happened in the past 4 minutes. "May I see your confirmation and ID, ma'am?" Gloria asked. "Your colleague has already reviewed both," Anita said. "But yes." Gloria looked at the printout. She looked at the government ID. She looked at the reservation in the system, which Becca pulled up on the screen and turned slightly so Gloria could see it. The room was confirmed. The voucher was valid. The name matched. The dates matched. There was nothing, not one single thing, that warranted additional verification or any intervention from security whatsoever. Gloria was trying to figure out the least catastrophic way to end this situation when the elevator doors at the far end of the lobby opened and 2 men stepped out. The first was a tall, silver-haired man in his early 60s wearing the kind of civilian suit that fit with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades in rooms where appearance communicated rank, even when rank wasn't displayed. But rank was displayed. Discreetly, on the lapel of his jacket, a small gold pin, the shape of a crossed musket and torch, beneath a single silver star. Brigadier General Raymond Osei Boateng, retired, currently serving as the symposium's honorary chair and the Army's senior liaison to the Charlotte Veterans Coalition. He had commanded the 82nd Airborne. He had been Deputy Commanding General of Army Forces Command. He had, on one occasion, received a phone call directly from the Secretary of Defense at 3 in the morning because no one else could be trusted to make the call that needed making. Walking beside him was his aide, a young captain named Torres, who carried a leather portfolio and whose expression, as he registered the situation unfolding at the front desk, shifted from neutral to alert in the time it took him to cross 15 feet of marble floor. General Osei Boateng had known Anita Beauchamp for 16 years. He had written 2 of her performance evaluations. He had recommended her for the Legion of Merit personally. He had sat beside her at a ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery and watched her hold herself together while they folded a flag for one of her pilots. And he had understood in that moment that she was made of something that most people would never get close enough to recognize. He saw her at the front desk. He saw Pruitt. He saw the set of Anita's shoulders. That particular quality of controlled stillness that he knew from 16 years meant she was working very hard to be the most professional person in a situation that did not deserve her professionalism. He walked across the lobby at a pace that was not hurried, because men like Raymond Osei Boateng do not need to hurry to make an entrance. The room simply reorganized itself around him as he moved. He stopped at the front desk. He looked at Dale Pruitt. He did not raise his voice. "I'd like someone to explain to me," he said, "why Colonel Beauchamp is still standing at this desk." Pruitt turned. He saw the suit. He saw the posture. He saw the pin, which he didn't immediately recognize, but the recognition of authority is not always about rank insignia. Sometimes it is simply about the way a room reacts to a person's presence, and the lobby of the Grand Harrington had just reacted in a way that made Pruitt's collar feel approximately 3 sizes too small. "Sir, we were just conducting a standard. I didn't ask what you were doing," General O.C. Beauchamp said. "I asked why she is still standing at this desk. Her room should have been provided when she presented her confirmed reservation. That was the correct procedure." What happened instead? The silence in the lobby had deepened. The kind of silence that has texture. Pruitt's mouth opened. Then it closed. He had prepared, somewhere in the back of his mind, for the possibility that someone would challenge him. He had not prepared for the specific quality of this challenge. Calm, precise, and delivered from a position of authority so absolute it didn't require announcement. "There were concerns," Pruitt said, "about the booking." "What concerns, specifically?" Pruitt looked at the reservation on the screen. He looked at the government voucher. He looked at the ID that Becca was still quietly holding. The answer, the honest answer, was that there were no concerns. There had never been any concerns. There was a black woman at a front desk and a man who had decided, on the basis of that single fact, that something must be wrong. He could not say that, but he also could not invent a concern that didn't exist with a one-star general watching him from 18 inches away. He said nothing. "Gloria," General O.C. Beauchamp said, turning to the director of security with the precision of a man who had already identified the most senior capable person in the room, "I'd like Colonel Beauchamp checked in immediately. I'd also like you to have someone pull the lobby footage from the last 15 minutes and preserve it. Do not erase it. Do not archive it. Do not let anyone touch it. Can you do that?" Gloria said. "Yes, sir," in the automatic tone of someone responding to a direct order before they've consciously decided to comply. "Thank you." He turned back to Pruitt. "What is your name?" "Pruitt." "Dale Pruitt." "Dale Pruitt, security manager." "Mr. Pruitt, you have just racially profiled a decorated United States Army officer in the lobby of a hotel hosting a federal veterans symposium. I want you to understand something clearly." He stepped forward, not aggressively, simply in the way that large ships move, steadily, with the understanding that the water will accommodate them. "I have the personal cell number of the regional vice president of this hotel chain. I have the direct line to the Department of Labor's Civil Rights Division. And in approximately 40 minutes, there will be a room full of senior military officers, 3 state legislators, and a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Veterans Affairs walking through those doors for our opening reception. I would strongly encourage you to think carefully about where you would like to be standing when they arrive." Pruitt looked like a man watching the ground disappear beneath his feet. Anita, for her part, had remained perfectly still throughout the entire exchange. She hadn't looked to the general for rescue. She hadn't flagged him down or signaled for intervention. She had simply stood her ground and allowed the truth of the situation to become undeniable on its own terms. That was the discipline of 23 years. He didn't need to shout when the facts were loud enough. Becca, with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been waiting for permission to do the right thing, processed the check-in. She slid the keycards across the counter. "Colonel Beauchamp," Becca said, "you're in room 1408. That's a corner suite. We've upgraded you at no charge, and I've added a dining credit for the restaurant this evening. I'm very sorry for the delay." Anita picked up the keycards. She looked at Dale Pruitt for a long moment, not with anger and not with triumph, but with the specific quality of attention that says, "I see exactly what you are." "Thank you, Becca," she said. She picked up her bag and walked to the elevator, straight-backed, unhurried. The lobby watched her go. The dining credit went unused that night because Anita had a keynote address to finalize. She sat at the desk in room 1408 for 3 hours, editing her remarks by the light of Charlotte's skyline. And she added one line near the end of the speech that hadn't been there before. She would deliver it the next morning to a room of 300 veterans and military families, and the applause that followed would be the kind that starts slowly, builds, and doesn't stop. General O.C. Beauchamp did not go home after dinner. He went directly to his room and made 2 phone calls. The first was to the regional vice president of the Harrington Group, a man named Walter Hendricks, whom he had met at a charity event 18 months prior. That call lasted 11 minutes. Hendrix's voice by the end of it was the voice of a man who has just understood the full dimensions of a problem he had no idea he had. The second call was to the Charlotte field office of the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. He left a detailed voicemail that included Dale Pruitt's name, badge number, the approximate timestamp of the incident, and a request that the lobby footage be subpoenaed before anyone at the hotel had the opportunity to develop selective memory about its contents. Gloria Trent pulled the footage herself that same evening. She watched it twice. Then she wrote a full-page incident report that she submitted directly to the general manager, bypassing Pruitt's chain entirely. In the report, she documented every moment from Pruitt's initial approach to Anita at the counter to his inability to articulate a single concrete concern when pressed by the general. The report used the phrase, "no operational justification" 7 times. Gloria had been in the industry long enough to know that sometimes the most important thing you can do is make sure the record is unambiguous. The formal inquiry began the following week. The hotel chain's corporate compliance team flew in from Atlanta. They reviewed the footage. They interviewed Becca, who told the truth clearly and without hesitation. They interviewed 2 guests who had been standing near the elevator bank and had seen the entire confrontation, one of whom had been quietly recording on his phone from the moment Pruitt told Anita to step away from the desk. That footage, 12 minutes and 40 seconds of it, was subsequently turned over to the investigators. They reviewed Dale Pruitt's prior incident reports. There were 11 of them over 9 years, ranging from complaints by guests who felt they had been stopped or questioned without cause, to an HR note from 4 years prior about a pattern of behavior that a previous manager had flagged and then failed to act on. The compliance team was not gentle about what they found. Pruitt was placed on administrative leave the day the footage review was completed. His termination followed 8 days later. The hotel chain issued a public statement acknowledging the incident, announcing mandatory civil rights and implicit bias training for all front-of-house and security staff across their 47 properties, and confirming a settlement had been reached with Colonel Beauchamp. The statement did not use the word apology in its first draft. Colonel Beauchamp's attorney sent 1 email. The second draft used the word apology 4 times. The DOJ inquiry expanded. What the civil rights investigators found as they dug into Pruitt's 9 years of incident reports across 2 different hotel properties was a pattern as clear and damning as a fingerprint. 14 incidents. 12 of the 14 involved guests who were Black or Hispanic. In 9 of the 14, the guests had been asked to leave common areas, questioned about their reservations, or subjected to additional verification that was never required of other guests. In 4 cases, local police had been called and had arrived to find no violation of any kind. Those calls had cost those guests things that don't appear in any incident report: the hour spent explaining themselves to officers, the humiliation conducted in public, the particular exhaustion of having to prove, again, that they belonged somewhere they had every right to be. Pruitt had not been acting alone in any operational sense. He had simply been allowed to continue. The compliance team's final report used the phrase systemic failure of oversight in its executive summary and recommended disciplinary review for 3 members of management who had received complaints about Pruitt and taken no meaningful action. Those reviews were not comfortable. On the morning of the symposium's second day, before the opening remarks began, General Osei Boating found Anita in the hallway outside the main conference room. She was reviewing her notes, coffee in hand, in the specific calm of someone who has already made peace with the day. "How are you?" he asked. She thought about it honestly. The way she always answered questions she took seriously. "Tired," she said. "Not from last night. From the accumulated weight of last night being the 47th version of the same night." She looked at him. "But also fine, because it's done." He nodded. He understood what she meant by done. Not that this kind of thing would stop happening. Not that the world had fundamentally changed between Tuesday and Wednesday, but that this specific instance, this specific man, this specific lobby, these 14 guests whose complaints had gone nowhere, had been seen, documented, and answered for. That was what done meant, not victory. Accountability. "Your remarks this morning," he said. "What did you add?" She smiled, just slightly. "Come find out." She walked into the conference room. 300 people rose when she was introduced. She stood at the podium, looked out at the room. Veterans, families, officers, advocates. And she began. She talked about the discipline of composure, about the difference between strength that announces itself and strength that simply holds. She talked about the specific courage it takes to stand still in the lobby and refuse to move when everything in the room is telling you that you don't belong. She talked about the fact that the armor they all wore in uniform, that armor didn't disappear when the uniform came off. It lived in the body, in the posture, in the refusal to be made small. And then she said the line she had added the night before, the line that would be quoted in 3 different articles about the symposium in the following week. They could not remove me from that lobby last night, and they could not remove me because I have stood in places far more hostile than a hotel lobby, and I have never, not once, ceded ground that was rightfully mine. The applause started in the front row and moved backward like a wave. Dale Pruitt did not hear it. He was at home in his apartment in South Charlotte, submitting job applications and not hearing back, and beginning to understand, slowly, with the dawning clarity of a man who has spent 9 years assuming his behavior carried no cost, that the world was not going to reset itself to accommodate his next chapter. The industry he had worked in for a decade was small enough that his name traveled. The incident report existed, the footage existed, the DOJ inquiry was public record. Every door he knocked on would eventually open onto the same room. The 14 guests whose complaints had been buried received letters from the hotel chain's legal team within 60 days of the compliance report. The letters were not everything those guests deserved, but they were something, and the complaints that had been buried were now entered into the public record as part of the DOJ's investigation, which meant they existed in a way they hadn't before. Witnessed, documented, real. Some things cannot be undone. The hour spent in a lobby being made to feel like a suspect. The phone call with a spouse afterward, trying to explain what happened, and hearing the familiar exhausted silence on the other end. That means I know, those things happened, and they will always have happened, and no settlement erases them. But some things can be answered for, and when they are answered for cleanly, completely, and on the record, when the footage is preserved, and the reports are filed, and the man who thought he was untouchable discovers that he was never untouchable, only unaccountable. That matters. It matters to the 47 people who were in that lobby. It matters to the 14 guests whose names are now in a federal file. It matters in the specific, non-glamorous, unglamorous way that accountability always matters, not as a victory, but as a correction. Dale Pruitt walked into that lobby believing that a badge and a posture and 9 years of institutional protection made him the most powerful person in the room. He had spent 9 years being right about that. He was wrong the moment Anita Beauchamp set her bag down at the front desk. He simply hadn't discovered it yet. True authority doesn't require an audience. It doesn't need to announce itself at the door, or plant its feet wide, or reach for a radio to prove it exists. It stands at a counter with its hands flat on the marble and waits, calmly and without flinching, for the truth to catch up with the room. It always does. If this story hit you the way it should, if you believe that composure is courage, that accountability is not optional, and that people who abuse their authority should be made to answer for it, hit that like button right now. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Voices of Truth because there are more stories like this one, and every single one of them deserves to be told.